The morning rain from 3 years ago may have passed, but for Nathan Ellis, it had never truly ended. Every time he drove past the old coffee shop, his heart grew heavy, as if his father's funeral had just taken place the day before. Ellis Grounds, once the beating heart of the neighborhood, now hung silently above a worn-down storefront. But to Nathan, it wasn't just a name or a building. It was a living memory of Harold Ellis, his father, his compass, the man with a boundless heart who created far more than just a coffee shop. Harold didn't open a business. He built a refuge, a haven where the lonely found warmth, the struggling received quiet help, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee blended with the sound of genuine laughter and everyday kindness. A sleek BMW pulled smoothly into a spot just outside the cafe. Nathan adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror, his eyes locked on the building etched into his memory since childhood. Now 42, he bore no resemblance to the scrappy kid who used to mop floors and scrub dishes beside his father on weekend. Today, he was a polished man, well-groomed, professionally dressed, a high-powered commercial real estate mogul with a corner office, a vast portfolio, and all the financial security his father had once dreamed he'd achieve. But that success had come with something else. Distance. Not just physical distance, but a subtle, aching disconnection from the place that once helped shape his soul. Every step Nathan took away from the cafe seemed to carry him further from the boy who once believed the value of a day wasn't measured in dollars earned, but in the way someone's eyes lit up from being seen, heard, and cared for. His father used to say, "Son, money can buy you a business, but it'll never buy you a legacy." Nathan had taken those words to heart. That's why after Harold's funeral, he had stepped away from day-to-day operations, trusting the board to maintain what his father had so carefully cultivated. He had convinced himself that staying out of it was an act of respect, that letting the place breathe without his interference was honoring his father's memory. But now, that silence felt like betrayal. Nathan was starting to see what he hadn't before. Distance doesn't preserve memories, it kills them. The final straw came when Martha told him the corner table, his father's sacred quiet corner for anyone having a hard day, had been removed. It was a small wooden table Harold always kept open, offering free coffee and a heartfelt conversation to anyone who needed a moment of peace. That little act of kindness had become a silent promise to the community. But now it had been replaced by high-top tables crammed along the walls, designed for efficiency, no place left for those who needed to sit down and just breathe. The time, Nathan had thanked Martha and promised to look into things, but weeks blurred into months. Real estate deals piled up, social events filled his calendar, investors needed handshakes, contracts needed signatures, and the truth was, it was easier to believe everything was still fine. After all, profits were strong, the reports looked solid. On paper, Ellis Grounds was thriving. That had to mean something, right? Until last week. The final wake-up call came from the last place Nathan expected. A client lunch. The woman's name was Eleanor, early 60s, sharply dressed, with kind eyes and a quiet strength. During their meal, the conversation turned casually toward local businesses, and that's when she mentioned Ellis Grounds, with an unmistakable sadness in her voice. "I used to love that place," she said softly, stirring her soup with an absent gaze. "My husband and I went there every Sunday after church for 15 years. Harold, the original owner, he always remembered our order, always asked about the grandkids." Even after Harold passed, they had kept going, clinging to a memory, hoping to feel connected. But the last few visits, they treated us like we were in the way. Eleanor continued. Calmed of the staff, timed how long we'd been sitting, then asked if we could finish up, said they needed the table. Her voice cracked slightly. We never went back. That night, Nathan sat alone in his high-rise apartment overlooking the city skyline, a skyline he had once worked tirelessly to reach. In his hands was a photograph from the cafe's 10th anniversary celebration. His father had one arm around him, their aprons covered in flour from helping in the kitchen, both smiling, laughing. The cafe had been bursting with life that day, filled with faces that looked like family. Because in a very real way they were. That's when Nathan made a decision so unlike him it even surprised himself. He wouldn't return as the owner demanding answers. He wouldn't call a board meeting. He wouldn't pore over spreadsheets or send stern emails. No, he would do what Harold had always done when he needed to understand something. He would walk into the story himself, from the ground up. The plan unfolded slowly, meticulously. Nathan would go undercover, not as Nathan Ellis, the successful businessman, but as a man his father would have embraced without hesitation. A man who had lost his job, lost his way. A man searching for honest work and a place to feel human again. He let his beard grow gray and unkempt, stopped cutting his hair. His posture became more stooped, his walk slower, as if he carried burdens that had no name. Wearing a weathered flannel shirt, frayed jeans, and an old baseball cap, Nathan quietly erased his identity, transforming himself into someone society might overlook. The next morning arrived with the crispness of early autumn, the kind that once made Ellis grounds feel magical. Nathan stood across the street at dawn, his breath visible in the air, staring at the place he hadn't stepped into in over a year. Only, it wasn't Ellis grounds anymore. The warm, honey-colored paint his father had so carefully applied had been replaced by a stark, soulless white. The hand-painted sign that once read Ellis Grounds Where Friends Gather in Harold's gentle handwriting had been ripped down. In its place was a sterile black corporate font. Ellis Grounds. Nothing more, nothing human. Even the flower boxes that once overflowed with wildflowers were gone, replaced with harsh metal planters filled with clipped boxwood shrubs. Identical, soulless, as if joy had been edited out. Nathan adjusted his cap, hunched his shoulders, and stepped toward the door. Today, he was no longer a businessman. No longer a son. Just a stranger returning to the ashes of something that once felt like home. He joined the line forming outside, 6 people deep. A man in a tailored suit tapped angrily on his phone. A college student balanced 3 heavy textbooks on her hip. No one spoke. No one smiled. Where there had once been a natural buzz of conversation and warmth, now there was only silence and screens. Through the cafe's large windows, Nathan could already see what had changed and what had vanished. Gone were the mismatched chairs Harold had collected from garage sales and estate auctions. Each one had a story, a soul, replaced now with rows of uniform metal furniture that looked more like an airport lounge than a neighborhood cafe. The walls no longer held children's drawings, local artists' paintings, or flyers for church events and support groups. Instead, they were plastered with generic motivational posters. Efficiency, precision, result. But it was the people, the staff, that broke Nathan's heart the most. Inside, 3 employees moved with cold precision, no chatter, no eye contact, no connection, just fast hands and empty expressions, machines dressed as baristas. He didn't recognize a single face. No Jenny, no Marcus, no old Pete. No one who would have known Harold. No one who would have smiled at him, even if he had walked in without a penny to his name. The cafe his father built, the sanctuary of warmth and humanity, was gone, and what stood in its place was just a machine, a business that made money, but had lost its soul. The man in front of Nathan received his drink in under 90 seconds. No smile, no thank you, just a transaction. The college student behind him asked for an extra shot of espresso. Kyle, the young barista, replied in a monotone, 75 cents. No welcome, no warmth. There wasn't a single trace left of what Harold Ellis had once called humanity steeped into every cup. When Nathan finally stepped forward, he found himself face to face with a young man who couldn't have been more than 20. His name tag read Kyle, printed in the same cold corporate font as the Ellis Grounds logo outside. Kyle's uniform was pristine, his movements crisp and mechanical like he'd been programmed for maximum efficiency. But his eyes were hollow, the vacant stare of someone who had long ago stopped feeling anything about the work he did. Next, Kyle said flatly, not bothering to lift his head. Good morning, Nathan replied, his voice roughened with age and wear, like a man who'd spent a lifetime doing honest, back-breaking work. Could I get a medium coffee, please? Kyle's brow twitched, still refusing eye contact. We don't do medium. Small, large, or extra large. Nathan blinked in surprise. Medium had always been the middle ground, something simple and familiar. His father had insisted on clear sizing because, as he used to say, people shouldn't need a translator to order coffee. It was a small detail, but one Nathan couldn't ignore. Large, then, he said softly. Kyle tapped the register without looking up. $4.25. Nathan reached into his worn jacket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. As he handed it over, he noticed something immediately. The tip jar was gone. His father had always kept one by the register, not because the staff needed extra money. Harold paid well above minimum wage, but because it gave customers a chance to express gratitude. It was part of the unspoken rhythm of kindness that made this place feel more like a home than a business. While he waited for his coffee, Nathan slowly moved toward the wall where his father's old community corner used to be. That space had once held a wooden bulletin board covered in flyers and notes from locals, job listings, garage sale announcements, babysitting services, and handwritten prayers for healing or hope. So many connections had been made on that wall. Students had found tutors, single mothers had found help, strangers had found encouragement when they needed it most. But now, in its place, stood a sleek digital screen, cold and impersonal, scrolling through advertisements for monthly coffee subscriptions and reward points. It was all clean, efficient, and soulless. At that moment, an elderly man entered the cafe. He moved carefully, each step measured and deliberate, the way people walk when age and arthritis are constant companions. Nathan watched him squint at the overhead menu, struggling to decipher the small print and trendy drink names. "Excuse me," the man said gently to Kyle. "Would it be possible to get a glass of water?" Kyle finally looked up, for the first time that morning. But there was no warmth in his face, only irritation. "Bottled water. $1.50, he said sharply. I'm sorry?" the old man asked, clearly confused. "Bottled water, $1.50. We're not a soup kitchen." Nathan felt his chest tighten. "We're not a soup kitchen." Those were words his father would never have allowed to be spoken in this cafe. Harold had always kept cups behind the counter for anyone who needed to take medication or simply needed a moment of grace. To him, compassion wasn't a service, it was a responsibility. The elderly man stood frozen, fumbling with his wallet. His hands trembled as he searched for change, clearly embarrassed. Behind him, a young mother holding a baby sighed audibly and checked her watch, her impatience practically humming off her skin. "I'll just get a small coffee," the old man whispered, his voice laced with shame. Kyle rang him up with robotic efficiency, and then, the moment that made Nathan's blood boil. Kyle rolled his eyes, right in front of the old man, as he struggled to count out coins. The young mother behind him muttered something under her breath, and Kyle gave her a smug little nod of agreement. That was it. That was the moment Nathan knew. Martha had been gentle in her warnings. This wasn't just about efficiency. This was about cruelty dressed up as procedure. His coffee arrived. Nathan took a cautious sip and immediately noticed the difference. Gone was the rich, smooth blend his father had perfected, a balance of Central American beans that needed no sugar to shine. What filled his cup now was bitter and burnt, the kind of brew that demanded cream and artificial syrup just to become drinkable. No wonder the condiment bar was overflowing with plastic bottles of caramel swirl and hazelnut fudge. He chose a familiar seat by the window, the very spot where he used to do homework while Harold experimented with new coffee blends in the back. From there, Nathan sat quietly and watched. And what he saw broke his heart. A teenager trying to pay for a small drink came up 30 cents short. Kyle turned him away, even though Nathan spotted a dusty take-a-penny, leave-a-penny tray. Empty and forgotten. A woman asking about gluten-free options was handed a laminated card with a list of ingredients. No advice, no kindness, no conversation. A man inquiring about Wi-Fi got the password, yes, but also a warning that loitering was not permitted during peak hours. A young mother with a crying infant asked if she could sit at the corner booth. Harold's old favorite, the one with the basket of toys and books. She was told it was reserved for larger parties. It had been empty the entire hour Nathan sat there. As he prepared to leave, one last detail caught his eye. Behind the gleaming new espresso machine, half hidden in shadow, was a small framed photo. Harold Ellis, smiling, proud. It was the only trace of the man who had built this place with love. Nathan stared at the photo, and he swore. His father's eyes looked sad, as if he too was watching everything he had built be drained of its soul. Ellis Grounds was gone. What stood in its place was a perfectly efficient system, polished, profitable, and lifeless. Nathan knew, with aching certainty, he couldn't let this continue. Tomorrow he would return, not as a silent observer, but as a participant. He would apply for a job. He would enter the belly of the machine and find out exactly how deep the rot went. Because if they treated customers this poorly, he could only imagine how they treated the people who worked behind the counter. Harold's legacy deserved better, and Nathan was ready to fight for it. As Nathan waited for the call to connect, he glanced back through the rain-speckled window. Darren was still glued to her phone, fingers scrolling with mechanical detachment. Kyle moved behind the counter with the same emotionless efficiency, wiping down the polished surface like it was just another task on an endless to-do list. Around them, customers sat in isolated silence, heads down, eyes vacant, not a single human connection in sight. It was a room full of people, and yet utterly empty. And a line clicked. "Operations, this is David." Nathan's grip on the phone tightened. His voice came out steady, but there was a weight behind it, forged from grief and steel. "David, this is Nathan Ellis. I need you to shut down the Ellis Grounds location on Maple Street. Today." There was a pause on the line. "Sir, is this an emergency, a safety issue?" Nathan looked up at the sign still bearing his father's name, mounted on a building that now drained warmth from the community, day by day, just as surely as it drained money from their wallets. "Yes," he said, softly, almost to himself. "It's an emergency. My father's legacy is dying, and I'm the only one who can save it." When orders came from someone in Nathan's position, the corporate machine moved with terrifying speed. Within 30 minutes, confirmation buzzed onto his phone. All vendor contracts suspended, credit card processing to be disabled by noon. All supply deliveries for the week canceled. He remained in his car, parked across the street, watching the cafe through a light curtain of drizzle. To the average passerby, Ellis grounds looked like it always had, normal. People came and went, coffees in hand, phones in faces. No one knew they were walking through the final hours of a place that had once been the heart of something beautiful. At 11:47 a.m., Nathan's phone vibrated. A text from David. All systems disabled. Credit payments will stop in 3 minutes. Nathan started the engine and pulled around to the alleyway and back, the same spot where, years ago, his father used to greet delivery drivers by name, cracking jokes and offering hot coffee from the early morning brew. He needed to see it happen with his own eyes. He needed to watch the machine collapse under its own hollow weight. Through the back window, he peered into what was now the employee break room. It had once been a warm space, filled with laughter, staff lunches, birthday cupcakes, and Harold's handwritten notes pinned to the fridge. Now, it was cold, clinical, empty, save for a motivational poster that read, "Maximize efficiency." At precisely 12 o'clock noon, his phone rang. "Mr. Ellis, this is David. The location manager is trying to reach you. Should I put him through?" "Not yet," Nathan said evenly. "Let him sit with it first." He didn't have to wait long. Through the glass, he watched as the chaos began to unfold. A customer approached the counter, swiped their card. Denied. Again, denied. Kyle frowned, clearly confused, and tried a third time. Nothing. Taryn appeared, pushing past him. Her usual composure evaporated into visible panic as she began hammering keys on the POS system. She picked up the phone, pacing, her voice rising with each attempt to explain something she clearly didn't understand. By 12:23 p.m., Wes Nolan burst through the cafe's front door like a man who'd just learned his kingdom had no walls. Nathan watched the young manager. Phone pressed to one ear, his other hand raking through his hair in frustration. It was the look of someone who had never served a customer in need, who had never looked someone in the eye and seen them as more than a transaction. Wes wasn't here to serve. He was here to control. And now control was slipping. Wes pointed sharply at Taryn. She nodded frantically, her fingers flying over the keyboard. He gestured at Kyle. The young man just shrugged. It was crumbling, all of it. Then Nathan's phone rang again. David's voice was tight. "Sir, the location manager says there's a critical systems failure. He's requesting emergency tech support and permission to override the shutdown." "Put him through," Nathan said calmly. A beat later, Wes's voice cracked through the line. "Mr. Ellis, thank God. We've had a complete system failure. Credit cards aren't working, supplier access is blocked, and we can't get a hold of corporate support. I need authorization to bring in emergency services and—" "Where are you calling from, Wes?" Nathan cut in, voice low and deliberate. "From the store, sir. I'm in the office now. It's chaos out here. I'll be right there." Nathan hung up. He didn't move right away. Instead, he sat in silence for a moment longer, watching Wes as he barked orders from the cafe floor, his hand waving wildly, eyes darting. Nathan could see the desperation in every twitch of his body. Then, with one long breath, Nathan reached up and peeled off the layers. The weathered baseball cap came off. His fingers ran through his hair, smoothing it back. The rough, scruffy beard gently detached, revealing the clean-shaven face known from magazine covers and business journals. Off came the ragged flannel jacket, exposing a tailored dress shirt beneath, pressed and ready. In less than a minute, Nathan Harper, the down-on-his-luck handyman, was gone. And Nathan Ellis, rightful owner, son of a legacy, had returned. He stepped through the front doors of Ellis grounds without hesitation. And chaos stopped. The scene inside was pure disorder. Angry customers crowded the counter, demanding answers as Terrence struggled to explain why they could only accept cash, though even the cash register was glitching. A line stretched to the door. People were checking their watches, muttering under their breath about being late. And then Nathan entered. He didn't shout. He didn't wave his arms. He didn't need to. The way he walked, calm, purposeful, like a man returning to a house that had been wrongfully claimed, commanded attention all on its own. No one recognized him just yet, but they felt something shift. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sharp, steady, the voice of boardroom authority trained over years of high-stakes decisions. "I need to speak with your manager." Terren looked up. Her eyes widened. Recognition dawned like lightning cracking across a midnight sky. This wasn't some vagrant. This wasn't the man she'd dismissed days ago. This was him. "Nathan Ellis," she stammered, nearly dropping the receipt in her hand. He's in the office." "No need," Nathan replied, loud enough for every single person in the cafe to hear. "Wes, come on out. Nathan Ellis is here. We need to talk." His name fell into the room like a thunderclap. Phones dropped. Conversations froze. Kyle stopped mid-matter, his hand halfway to the espresso machine. Then Wes emerged. And Nathan saw it, first confusion, then horror, as recognition spread across the manager's face like cold sweat. "Mr. Ellis," Wes said quickly, his tone strained and shaking. "We weren't informed. If we had known you were visiting—" "I was here yesterday," Nathan interrupted calmly, "and the day before that. You just didn't recognize me." He let the silence hang. Let the truth settle like dust on polished metal. "The sign outside still bears my father's name," he continued, voice rising just enough to reach every corner of the cafe. "But this," he gestured around the sterile, soulless space, "this is not what he built." The room fell into dead silence. Only the hiss of the broken espresso machine punctuated the moment. And everyone in that cafe, managers, employees, and customers alike, realized something fundamental had shifted. The man who owned this place wasn't just back. He was ready to tear it down to the studs if that's what it took to rebuild it. Jenny, Marcus, Sarah, once the beating heart of Ellis Grounds, and now standing behind the counter, tears streaming down their faces. "Jenny," Nathan's voice broke as he stepped closer. "You're still here?" She nodded, wiping at her cheeks. "We tried to hold on to Mr. Harold's spirit," she said through a sob. "But every week there was a new rule. No calling customers by name. It wastes time. Every order under 90 seconds. That's the rule." Marcus jumped in, his voice shaking with frustration. "They took down the pay it forward board, the one Mr. Harold started. Said it caused accounting issues. Customers aren't allowed to buy coffee for others anymore." Sarah added, barely above a whisper, "They fired Ms. Rodriguez for giving a free cup to a homeless veteran." Nathan turned slowly toward Wes. "Is that true?" Wes straightened his spine, forcing a corporate calm. "Mr. Ellis, I understand you're upset, but everything we implemented was for the sake of increased efficiency and profitability." "Profitability," Nathan repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "So, what's the revenue impact when you push out the 60-year-old woman who used to volunteer reading stories to kids every Saturday, or the Sunday chess club, or the book group that met here every Thursday night for 12 years? Wes opened his mouth, but Nathan held up a hand. "Now, let's talk numbers then. You like numbers?" He pulled out his phone. "In just 3 hours of this going public, I've received 47 emails asking what happened to the real Ellis Grounds. 18 former employees reached out asking to come back. Local news called. The community Facebook group has gone viral. Thousands of shares, all filled with memories." He tapped the screen. Mrs. Chin wrote in, said her late husband proposed to her at table 7. The Riverside debate team asked if they can still host their meets here. Father Martinez wants to know if we'll still donate pastries to the church like we used to. Nathan raised his eyes to Wes, whose face had turned the color of wet ash. You optimized everything, right out of this place's soul. You turned my father's legacy into a machine that processes transactions, instead of connecting hearts. Then he turned to the room. The customers, the staff, the community who had fallen silent, waiting for what would come next. Effective immediately, Wes Nolan, you're fired. Taryn, too. The current management structure is dissolved. It was like a pressure valve blew open. Jenny burst into fresh tears, this time from relief. Marcus reached for Sarah and pulled her into a hug. Customers stood and began clapping, soft at first, then louder, swelling into a wave of long-suppressed gratitude. Nathan looked around the cafe one last time. Yes, it had bhan gutted by the hollow gods of modernization. Yes, it had been stripped of its warmth. But he didn't see what had been lost. He saw what could be rebuilt. This cafe isn't closing forever, he said, his voice clear. We're rebuilding it, the way my father dreamed it could be, and from now on it will be known as... He paused, eyes misting over. Harold's House Cafe. 6 months later, Nathan stood in the very spot where Tehran once humiliated him. But today, everything around him had changed. And yet, it felt like coming home. The walls were no longer the sterile white of soulless commerce. They'd been repainted in the familiar, warm honey gold his father had once brushed on with his own hands. The furniture? Mismatched again. Each chair had a story. Each table held a memory. All carefully restored or recreated from memory and photographs. Local artwork once again filled the walls, including a hand-drawn piece that brought a smile to every face who saw it. A child's crayon sketch of Harold and Nathan standing side by side behind the counter, with a lopsided heart and the words, "The Coffee Daddies." Rebuilding the cafe had been neither easy nor fast, but Nathan had learned something that no financial report could ever teach him. Restoring trust is harder than repainting walls. And he was ready for that challenge, not just for his father, but for the community. Because a legacy isn't just something you inherit. It's something you live. The first month of rebuilding wasn't spent talking about decor or new signage. Nathan spent it listening, really listening, to every former employee, to every lost customer, to anyone who had ever seen Ellis grounds as more than a place to grab a cup of coffee. 3 notebooks, filled to the edges with handwritten stories, regrets, hopes, and prayers. The hardest part wasn't the money. It wasn't construction. It was looking in the mirror and owning the role he had played in letting it all fall apart. He thought he'd honored his father by stepping back, by trusting professionals. But in doing so, he'd unknowingly given permission for everything Harold Ellis built to be erased. And in those dark months after the shutdown, Nathan wasn't grieving just the cafe. He was grieving the version of himself who had once believed in something more than margins and metrics. The first person he called was Martha Rodriguez. When he told her about the reopening, she choked up and laughed through tears. Your father once told me, Martha is too stubborn to let anyone ruin a good cup of coffee. She came back without hesitation. This time, not just as a barista, but as the new general manager. Nathan had begged her to take the job. She accepted with grace, grit, and fire in her eyes. Along with her came Jenny, Marcus, and Sarah, those who had been optimized out in the name of progress. But Nathan also hired new faces, the kind his father would have welcomed without hesitation. David, a former teacher, now part-time so he could care for his aging mother. Maria, a teenage mom juggling community college and childcare. Pete, not the original Pete, but a retired local who had heard about the relaunch and wanted to belong somewhere again. The grand reopening was set for the first Saturday of spring, exactly 6 months to the day since the shutdown. Nathan arrived at 5 a.m. The street was still wrapped in mist, the morning air thick with dew. And already there was a line. First in line was Mrs. Patterson, wrapped in her signature purple coat, sipping from her thermos and chatting joyfully with the man behind her. "Our cafe's back," she said, beaming. At exactly 7:00 a.m., Nathan unlocked the front door. And this time, just below the hand-painted Harold's House Café, a small brass plaque read, "Where everyone belongs." Mrs. Patterson was the first to enter. She ordered her usual cappuccino with extra foam and then asked Jenny how the wedding plans were going for her daughter. No rush, no transaction, just real conversation. The entire morning felt like an orchestra of memory and new life. The chess club reclaimed their corner table. The book group penciled in Thursday nights again. A young mother asked to warm her baby's bottle, and Maria smiled, pointing to the toy basket and reading nook, now restored in the booth. But the most powerful moment came when Father Martinez entered. With Mrs. Chin. Nathan had made sure table 7 was exactly as it had been, the same mismatched chairs, the same soft lamp, the same view of the community board now bursting again with handwritten notes, job openings, garage sales, prayer requests. Mrs. Chin sat quietly for nearly an hour, gently running her fingers across the table's surface, lost in memories only she could see. When she finally stood to leave, she pressed a $20.00 bill into Nathan's hand. "For the next person who can't afford their coffee," she said softly. Mr. Harold would have liked that. The Pay It Forward board was back too, bigger and brighter than ever. By noon, 17 drinks had already been paid forward. One note read, "For anyone having the kind of day where they need a friend." Nathan had upheld his father's golden rule. No one is turned away for lack of money. No one is made to feel ashamed for needing help. As the day wound down, Nathan stood behind the counter where his father had once stood, with a framed photo of them on opening day 22 years ago hanging above. Below the photo, carved into wood, was Harold's favorite quote, "A legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you live every day." Jenny approached as the final customer, a college student who'd been studying for 6 hours, packed up to leave. She glanced at Nathan, her eyes soft with gratitude. "How do you think your dad would feel about today?" Nathan looked around. An old man teaching a boy to play chess, 2 women planning a baby shower, a teenager sketching in the sunlight, earbuds in, humming along to gentle acoustic music. He swallowed hard, voice thick. "I think he'd say we finally remembered the most important thing. A good cafe doesn't just serve coffee. It serves the community." Just before he locked the door for the night, Nathan noticed a folded note that had been slipped under the door. He picked it up, unfolded it, and read the messy handwriting. "I'm sorry. I forgot that everyone deserves kindness. Would you give me a second chance?" It was signed, Taren. Nathan smiled. His father always believed in second chances, in redemption, in the power of forgiveness to rebuild what numbers could never measure. Tomorrow Nathan would call her. Because if Harold's House Café was truly going to carry his father's legacy forward, it had to be a place where even the lost could find their way home. The coffee wasn't just brewed again. It had been reborn, carrying forward the old soul with a brand new heart.